We continue with the keynote address, and I'm very pleased
Vamos a seguir con la sesión principal
to introduce to you Professor Wilfred McSherry.
y quiero presentaros al profesor Wilfred McSherry.
So he will have the keynote about strength and courage to uphold the nurse-patient covenant to care.
Él va a hablar acerca de la fortaleza y el valor de, para que la enfermera pueda mantener el pacto que se hace con el paciente y enfermero. Pacto, sí, ¿no?
So Wilfred McSherry is a professor
Él es profesor
at the Department of Nursing, School of Health Science and Wellbeing at Staffordshire University in England.
en la Universidad de Staffordshire en Inglaterra, en la Escuela de Enfermería.
Yeah. So he also works with the Hospital of North Midlands.
También trabaja en un hospital, con otro hospital en el norte de Inglaterra.
And has been a part-time professor at Leeds Specialized University.
Y también ha sido profesor a tiempo parcial en una universidad especializada en enfermería.
So he has more than 30 years of nursing career,
Él ha sido enfermero más de 30 años,
where he has advocated for dignity and spirituality,
y él ha sido un abogado de espiritualidad y de dignidad para los enfermeros
in acute care,
y también para los cuidados paliativos
and especially of care of the elderly people and end-of-life care.
y sobre todo para los cuidados de personas mayores y personas que necesitan cuidado constante.
And if you read spiritual care research,
Y si leéis acerca de las investigaciones que se han hecho acerca del
spiritual care research,
del cuidado espiritual,
and you check the reference list, you will see his name.
y miras cuidadosamente, encontrarás su nombre,
Because-
Wilfred McSherry,
Because he is one of the most cited in spiritual care research within our profession.
porque él es uno de los profesores más citados en esa especialidad de cuidado.
Yeah. So he has developed a spirituality and spiritual care rating scale that is widely used and translated into many languages.
Él ha desarrollado una escala para poder medir la espiritualidad y el cuidado y se usa grandemente
And another
en
thing
varios idiomas.
you should know when you listen to him is that he has been leading the Royal College of Nursing in UK in exploring members' perceptions of spirituality.
Él ha llevado un colegio mayor real de enfermería explorando la percepción espiritual
And also in New Zealand
Australia.
and Australia.
en Nueva Zelanda y en Australia también.
So he has been developing Spiritual in Nursing Care, which is an online resource.
Él ha estado desarrollando el cuidado espiritual de los enfermeros y enfermeras de una forma continua.
And also a Spirituality in Care, a pocket guide that has been online on the Royal College of Nursing.
No.
Y un librito que todavía no ha sido traducido al español, que está online, pero como está en inglés, pues
Yeah. So let me
con buscar
pray
su
for
nombre
you
podéis
before
encontrarlo.
you give your keynote.
Vamos a orar por él
Yeah.
antes de que comparta.
Dear Lord, thank you for bringing Wilf to us today.
Señor, gracias por todo lo que nos has traído hoy de tu riqueza.
Strengthen him as he speaks.
Pedimos por nuestro hermano y pedimos que tú lo fortalezcas cuando hable
And open our hearts so we can bring home what is within our sphere of responsibility.
y, Señor, ayúdanos a abrir nuestros corazones para poder recibir la parte de responsabilidad que nos toca.
Amen.
Amén. Ahora, por favor, los de habla hispana, os tenéis que poner vuestros auriculares y conectaros a Life Voice. Gracias. God bless you.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's interesting now, we've had some prayers for getting me here, because I nearly didn't. 2 cancellations and nearly a day and a half delayed with no luggage, but I'm here, thankfully. So I'll just wait for the slides. If we can go back one, please. So I would like to thank Nurses Christian Fellowship International for the opportunity to come and speak at this 2024 World Congress. It's a real privilege. It's been a real honour to meet so many people from so many diverse cultures and regions of our world. And it's really encouraging to see so much enthusiasm and passion for things that are important to our humanity, and especially around the areas that I'm going to speak to this morning. So if we can go to slide 2. So what can you expect? I'm conscious we're well over time, so I will try and condense so we can pull some time back on the timetable. So what I'm going to do is I've divided this keynote lecture into the following sections. I'm going to tell you a little bit about who I am, my story, my identity. I'm going to say a little bit about what do we mean by the nurse-patient covenant. What are the challenges that we are facing? I've been reflecting on the UK situation, but I think a lot of these challenges are truly international, or they have an impact internationally. So what are these challenges? What do we require as healthcare professionals, nurses, midwives, whatever capacity we're working in healthcare, to have the courage and strength to face these challenges and overcome them? And then I'll give some concluding points. So, as you can see, this is quite a busy slide. But the point I'm trying to highlight is family and families are important to who we are. They provide us with a history and a context. So on this slide are my parents, my 2 older brothers, my twin brother and my older brother, and the location in England, in the United Kingdom where I come from. It isn't a very clear slide. It's quite dull, but you can see there were 3. My dad was a miner. He worked in the coal mine, Hague Pit. My mum was a seamstress. She made military uniforms, and nobody in our family history had been to university. I was the first to go to university, and all 3 of us have been to university. All 3 of us are registered nurses. And my twin brother, both of us were made professors of nursing in the same year, the first time in the UK, allegedly. And at school, we were labelled as mentally retarded, my twin brother and myself. One of our teachers lived next door to an auntie, and one evening she was talking, and she said, "Those 2 twins will never do anything with their lives. They are mentally retarded." She never ever told my mum what this teacher said. Unfortunately, we couldn't go back to the teacher because sadly she died. But all of us throughout life face challenges. We can face discrimination, we can face issues that can impact on our dignity, our sense of identity. So I don't hold grudges. I think for me it's about our passion, our ambition, and about our motivation. And for me personally, it's about my personal faith and how that can strengthen and give courage. Next slide, please. What I want to emphasize from this slide is that nurses and midwives are probably the most powerful profession in our healthcare systems. When you look, so the WHO reinforces that nursing is one of the largest professions in the world. Without nurses, our healthcare system would not function, and the WHO highlights that despite there being over 29 million nurses worldwide and 2.2 million midwives, there is still a shortfall. So there's not enough of us. And I think one of the worrying trends I'm going to highlight is that's going to get worse in the future. in terms of applications to nursing, and not so much to midwifery, but there are certain fields of nursing where people aren't applying, and we'll say something about that. So what might be the implications of this on our ability to preserve and maintain this patient covenant? If there aren't going to be enough of us, and the statistics suggest that that's going to be worse in the future, what are we going to do? What impact will that have on us as practitioners, as people who are interested and have a vested interest in preserving this covenant? Next slide, please. There are some times in your life when you come across a book and it can have such a significant impact in terms of what it opens up before you. This book, when I was doing my PhD, was a catalyst in terms of opening up what spirituality meant, that what it was in terms of this patient-nurse covenant, this relationship of care. So, Dr. Anne Bradshaw is a nurse. She was, I think she's emeritus senior lecturer at a university in the United Kingdom, and she's written some wonderful texts on this covenant of care. And I would certainly encourage, if you don't, this is quite an academic text, but there are some lovely sections in it that really reinforce the role of the nurse. And I would say from this work, Anne Bradshaw's been quite prophetic, because when you read her article from 1999, what she mentions and refers to in that article are actually happening now in our healthcare systems in terms of the changing role of the nurse, the fragmentation of caring, the devaluing of fundamental care. All of that is happening, manifesting itself now. Just last week before I came here, there was a documentary on the UK television where they'd gone undercover and were filming care delivery within an emergency care department. We're in challenging times in terms of care provision. And there are many factors for that. Our ageing population, the demands placed on our healthcare system, inability to join up our health and social care systems. There are some huge challenges. So Anne Bradshaw highlights clearly what happens is when we move away from this covenant of care. Next slide, please. So for me, this covenant is what we call a triad. If we think of the Trinity, this is very similar. At the top of this is the patient. Everything we do is about enabling and safeguarding the needs and the well-being of the patient, their dignity, who they are as a person, their identity. And the only way we can do that is how we as nurses, midwives, healthcare professionals work, who we are as in our professional role, and how we work collectively and collaboratively with our colleagues. So this is, I've been listening to some of the presentations, relationship, that relational element to this is so crucial. Everything we do is within relationship. It's within that context. It's how we preserve the dignity of the person. So, for me, the covenant of care is about the preservation of the person's dignity. And it's relational and it's reciprocal. We give and we receive in equal measures. And what I've called the sacred triad, because it is, if we can go back to the next slide, please. We can't do this without one of these elements. If we remove one, then it ceases to exist and function effectively. So we've got to include in this relationship as well the patient, their main carers, their family. That's crucial if we're going to preserve the dignity of the person. Next slide. We hear frequently the word holistic care, and there's a whole range of other, what I would term, buzzwords that we hear in our healthcare systems. But if we omit the word spiritual from any definition or any model of holistic care, then it isn't holistic. So, for example, I'm going to talk about the next. So depending on the needs of the individual, whatever those needs that are most important would be at the centre of this circle. So this is dynamic. So for some people, there might be a spiritual need, others it might be physical. But we've got to have this holistic approach. Most models and theories of holistic care present a circle into a pie chart. And they'll say physical, psychological, social, and if you're lucky, they will include a spiritual dimension, but not always. That's a reductionist model. I get criticised sometimes for presenting this model, but for me, holistic is holistic. There isn't one aspect that is superior to the other, one dimension. We've got to give attention to all of this. When I'm caring for patients, I don't sit down and say with them, I'm now meeting your physical needs, I'm now meeting your psychological, by the way, what are your spiritual? It's done in that reciprocal relationship. It's done in that continuous, integrated way. Next slide, please. So, one of the biggest challenges we face in the UK is encouraging our professional regulatory body, the Nursing and Midwifery Council, to recognise the importance of that spiritual dimension. When I've, as Tova, and I didn't thank Tova for her kind words of introduction, I've known Tova for a long time, but when and Tova said, I've been a nurse for over 30 years, I've been in healthcare for over 40, and when we look at the history and the evolution of our nursing code of practice, up until about the late 80s, the word spiritual was present. After that, it was removed. And there have been numerous iterations of our code of practice. The last version was in 2015. There was an amendment made in 2018. But the word spiritual's been omitted ever since the late 80s. In 2015, if we go to the next slide. So in 2015, our new version of the code arrived, and we'd been campaigning, working with the Nursing Midwifery Council, providing evidence about the importance of spirituality. So we were expecting to see the word spiritual reinserted. So it was no longer just a biopsychosocial model of care, it was truly holistic. However, when the new code of practice came through my letterbox, I looked with great eagerness, and to my horror, the word spiritual wasn't in. So myself and a good friend and colleague, Professor Linda Ross from the University of South Wales, wrote a nice 4-page letter to the Chief Executive of the NMC at that time, asking if they could signpost us to minutes where the decision was made not to include the word spiritual. And about 4 weeks later, we got a 2-page letter back. I won't go into the detail of it all, but we weren't happy. So what we did is we contacted the NMC and we said we're going to publish these responses in our weekly nursing magazine. And these are some of the debates we'd been having with the NMC to encourage them to revisit that decision. And I'll come back to that. Next slide, please. So, if we're going to preserve people's dignity and acknowledge them as an holistic person, then there are certain aspects of dignity that we must consider. And there are numerous books written on the importance of dignity and dignity in care. But this is a lovely article written by 2 people called Nordenfelt and Edgar. And they break dignity down into 4 notions of dignity. The first dignity is the dignity of a human being. And in that sense, dignity is often enshrined in legislation. We know there are certain parts of the world where this doesn't happen. People's rights aren't protected in law, and we know there are abuses and violations. Then it's about who we are as a person, our identity. We've been speaking a lot about self-care and how we develop resilience and coping in the roles that we fulfill. The next one, dignity of merit, is the most contested element. Because if you look at that notion of dignity, what it could imply is there are some people more deserving of dignity than others, depending what's on their bank account, what's after their name in terms of titles. So there's a big debate about whether we should remove this notion. And then the final one is about moral stature. People say to me, where does spirituality fit in this? It fits in all of it, because spirituality influences all of this, our beliefs, our values, our worldview, our outlook on life. Back to the word spirit, people say to the merit, people say, get shot of it, remove it. And I'm saying, hang on, let's be cautious. I have done quite a bit of work on how we care for people living with dementia. And one of the ways I get a route in is building a biography, an understanding of that person's personal life, who they are as a person. And that approach, notion of dignity, enables me to do this. It helps me to look at who they are. And that might help me understand some of their behaviour, some of their identity. So all of this covenant is about the preservation of dignity. The patient's dignity, our dignity, and the people we work with. And I know I've worked in organisations where that doesn't always happen in terms of being valued, being recognised, and your dignity being preserved. Next slide, please. So it's pretty clear that we as nurses, and then if we look at the mandate for the, I think it's the International Confederation of Midwives, their code of practice, spirituality is explicit. So one of the things we've been campaigning and raising awareness with our Nursing and Midwifery Council is their code of practice isn't in line with this code of practice. There's a mismatch. Because we've got a clear mandate to address the person holistically and to focus specifically on those spiritual aspects, those spiritual needs of the person. So it isn't just us who are here who are passionate about these concepts. We've got a professional obligation to actively engage with these issues in practice. Next slide, please. So, what are the challenges? For me, these are probably the key challenges, and I've got about 10 minutes left now, so I haven't got time to go through all of these. But what I'm going to focus on, 20 minutes, good. I've got a bit more time, I might look at a bit more. Fragmentation of care, so treatment versus care. How do we prevent this from happening in our practice? I want to look briefly at staffing levels in terms of recruitment. And I want to look at misrepresentation of this covenant of care. Is it an opportunity to proselytise? And if it is, where does that leave us in terms of our professional practice? And it was interesting yesterday because Benson made a quick reference to this issue in the UK, so I'll elaborate a little bit further on this. And then the other final one, which post-pandemic is pretty significant, is the image of nursing. And I'll focus on that. So I probably won't look at all of these in depth, just a couple of them. Next slide, please. Right, so I remember doing some research, and I was talking to patients, participants, about the meaning of spirituality and where did that feature in their care. And I remember talking to an older gentleman who was dying from terminal lung cancer. And he said to me, I first met him in the hospice, and then I'd arranged to do the interview with him in his home. And I can still see that interview and that gentleman now as clearly as it happened on that day. I remember walking up the path to his house, knocking on the door. He lived in a little bungalow with his wife. His wife opened the door, showed me into the living room, brought me a cup of tea, and I think we had over an hour and 10 minutes conversation, and I spoke 3 times, maybe 4 in the course of that conversation. And this is some of his experience. So he said to me, Wilf, we get treatment and care. So like I said, this is an excerpt of a transcript with an elderly gentleman who was dying from terminal lung cancer. Wilf, he said, we get treatment in the hospital and care in the hospice. And this phrase still has a relevance and significance for nursing and healthcare delivery everywhere. The fact that this gentleman was able to make a distinction between treatment and care strike at the heart of some of the issues that are impacting upon our nursing, health and social care systems. The phrase implies treatment is different to care, and care, or more precisely caring, takes precedence or supersedes treatment. So what did he say, this gentleman? What did he mean? Next slide, please. Treatment. Someone who's technically proficient, good at the job, doing what they should in a time and manner that's appropriate to the needs of the person. In summary, he said, a practitioner, a care worker, a nurse who displays technical competence and proficiency with regards to the tasks and duties they perform. Yet, despite technical proficiency, he said, their actions, he said, despite technical proficiency, the use of the word treatment, he said, can present a picture of someone warm, someone robotic in their actions, someone detached and emotionally disconnected from that process of care. The word treatment, he said, can feel cold, scientific, and what was interesting, he added the word heartless, in that it appears to lack that human compassion and interaction. So that was treatment. What did he say about care? Next slide, please. The word care, he said, conjures up a picture of someone warm, someone who takes time and provides a presence. Care, or more precisely caring, he said, is about being valued and accepted as a unique person with a unique set of needs. And he said these needs may be expressed holistically. So this raises a question. Can treatment and care be given synonymously when meeting the diverse needs of individuals? It's interesting, I've been following, how do you pronounce it, Uber. And how Tova and Pam and another colleague were leading the course Art and Science of Spiritual Care. Because this is what this is about. We've got to have competence. We've got to have that scientific, that technical knowledge in order to practice safely. But equally, what this gentleman was telling us, we've got to have those altruistic, those humanistic values integrated. So this raises a question. Can treatment and care be given synonymously when we meet in the diverse needs of people? So let me illustrate. This gentleman went on and he elaborated and qualified his statement by adding, Wilf, there's a hard and a soft nurse. And I asked, can you explain this for me? So that was probably one of the 3 times I spoke to him. The response he gave was, the hard nurse approaches me with the opening, what's this pain in your chest? And the gentleman said, instantly, I know he or she is not concerned with me as a person, but with the condition that's brought me into hospital. While the soft nurse asks, how are you this morning? How are you feeling? How are your wife and your family? He said, they're concerned with me as a person and my situation, not just the medical condition that's brought me into hospital. So this illustration tells us 2 fundamental things about patients and the public we serve. Firstly, they want care or caring, and not just treatment. And importantly, they can distinguish the type of practitioner who is likely to provide this. So I've held many roles in the NHS, and one of the measures of patient satisfaction and quality of care is what we call the family and friends test. And I often say, long before we've given out, not long before we've given out this family and friends test, you and I, as a practitioner, have been audited. As soon as I walk into a room where there are patients, members of the public, I'm being observed. What is my demeanour? What is my attitude? Am I professional? Am I open? Am I courteous? Because I know there's experiences where you can walk into a situation and all the nurses or the midwives or other health professionals will be sat around a desk, a station, head down, not even acknowledging your presence. What does that communicate? We are being audited. Our values are being audited long before we've given a form to fill in. Next slide, please. So that balance, how do we get this? How do we get those values and be technically proficient? So that's the first challenge. If we're going to preserve the covenant of care, those relationships, then we've got to get this balance right. And sometimes it swings one way and the other way. We need to be competent. We need that technical skill and that knowledge in order to practice safely. Next slide, please. So I admired Benson's presentation yesterday. I wish I had his energy and his enthusiasm and his youth. But he was courageous, because I think Benson spoke about, where is Benson? I can't see him. Is he gone? But because he mentioned something that's very important, that's impacting on many healthcare systems, and that's about the international recruitment of internationally educated nurses. Because in the UK and probably other parts of the world, we have a real problem in terms of staffing, safe staffing levels, right across the sector. Nursing, midwifery, other healthcare professions, there aren't enough of us. And the challenge is, how do we get the right number of staff with the right set of skills in the right place at the right time? And if we can crack that, we're onto a winner. But I don't think that's going to be resolved anytime soon. And I know I've done a lot of work with the Royal College of Nursing in the UK, and I admire their tenacity and their energy in terms of trying to address this and find solutions. But all of this is political. It'll be interesting to see what happens in the UK after the 4th of July next week. It'll be interesting to see what happens. So that's one big out, because all of this has a huge impact on how we recruit our nurses, our healthcare professionals, how we retain them, and how we prevent them from leaving. And at the minute, there seems to be a mass exodus from these professions, and that's a worry. Next slide, please. So this is where I think Benson was very courageous, because there is an assumption that recruiting other healthcare professionals from other parts of the world is a solution. It might be a short-term solution, but then that has impact on the countries where people are migrating from. And I think Benson's plea yesterday was right. But I'm not against migration and people coming, but if that happens, we need to ensure those people, our colleagues who are working with us, are supported, are inducted correctly, aren't exploited, are given the education and the preceptorship to practice safely. Because what's concerning, when you look at this in the UK, the number of reports and articles that have been published of almost a decade and a half, nothing's changed. But what has changed is the numbers of people who are being recruited. So this is another big challenge for us in our profession. How do we address this so we can address those moral and ethical implications? Is it right to deplete a workforce in another country to plug a shortfall in another one. These are big moral and ethical questions that have got to be engaged with if we're going to resolve this. Next slide. Right. Misrepresentation of the covenant of care, opportunity to proselytise. When we look at people's perceptions of spirituality, I think in the last 3 decades we've come a long way in redressing some of the misconception. If I used to ask 2 decades ago, what is your understanding of the word spiritual? People would be selling me to religion. And for some people that is important, no question. But in the UK, our media can focus on the negatives. So one of the things in 2009, towards the end of 2009, I got a telephone call from the deputy head of nursing at the Royal College of Nursing saying, Wilf, we know that you've got an interest in spirituality. Will you come and join us? Special interest group we've set up. And so I went down. And part of the reason for setting that meeting up was in response to the Caroline Petrie case. Caroline Petrie was a community nurse, was caring for an elder lady one evening, left, and as she left, she said to the elderly lady, would you like me to pray for you? That was it. And the lady didn't respond, but the lady's main carer came home later that evening, communicated what this nurse had said, and she got straight on the phone to Caroline Petrie's employer and said, this nurse is using her position to proselytise. She was suspended that evening. But when you look at the case, so I've given you the references, when you look at the accounts in the newspapers, Caroline Petrie had been given a caution previously for distributing prayer cards to patients. So they felt this was a step too far. But it raised a lot of questions about what's the relationship between our personal belief, our professional practice. Put your hand up if you think we should pray with patients. Oh, it's a bit... I was expecting more. Right, so I'll... Right, so should we pray for patients with consent? Express need. Right. So what we don't do is do this randomly and without consent. So this raised some big questions to the Department of Health in England and the different health ministers across the UK, the Nursing and Midwifery Council and the Royal College of Nursing. All of them were asked to comment on the Caroline Petrie case, and there wasn't any comment, because what they hadn't done is been engaging with this body of evidence on the importance of spirituality for patients. Caroline Petrie was reinstated. I think it was a week later, and it wasn't long. I know it wasn't long that she was reinstated. Nurse Kutcher, Sarah Kutcher, was a sister working in a surgical assessment unit. And you'd have to read the article, but Caroline Kutcher was struck off, was removed from the professional register for telling patients to pray before they went to surgery. It's probably a bit more sensitive than that, but it highlights people's sensitivities to these areas, and how, as healthcare professionals in whatever profession we practice, it's all about consent. It's about patient expressed need. It's about the relationship between my personal belief and my professional practice. So one of the things the RCN, when I did the Royal College of Nursing survey on members' perceptions of spirituality, there was several participants actually referred to the Caroline Petrie case. There was quite a lot of anxiety about how do we integrate, or can we relate personal and professional belief. So one of the things we did was produce this little pocket guide. And one of the sections is integrating personal belief and professional practice. And the first thing we say, has the intervention been initiated by the patient, client, If it hasn't, don't go any further. That's it. If it's initiated by you as a person, don't do it. Because you can end up in front of, in our case, our nursing and midwifery professional conduct committee. So what I'm trying to say, this is about self-awareness. This is about awareness of our professionalism and our own personal beliefs and practice. These are like gold dust. I can give one away. So if there's somebody with a burning desire to have an RCN pocket guide, please see me. Next slide, please. So I said as well, one of the biggest challenges is the image of nursing. And this was, I don't know what you feel about this, but for me, during the COVID pandemic, the use of heroes and comic strip Marvel heroes and nurses, and I don't know whether that was helpful. Because what it implies is we seem to be, it seems to diminish our humanity. And so that we need to revisit this. So there's been a lot of work done on the image of nursing. And this slide, it says, if we can go back, please. Yeah, so we concluded that the nursing profession is viewed as female with low skills, social status, salary, academic level, and entry requirements, and with little autonomy. And when you look at when this article was written in 2022, have we come very far from that Nightingale model of subservience and submission? I think we have, but maybe that we need to be revisiting some of this in terms of being more empowering, be more challenging. It was great when Benson said become politicians. I know we all can't be politicians, but we can certainly challenge. We can certainly, it's up to us how we present as a profession. And I think that's the biggest challenge, is we need to take ownership for that. Male nurses' professional competencies and masculinity are questioned. I know as a male nurse working in a primarily female occupation, some of the perceptions that were levied to me, to my brothers, and to other male nurses who I was with. I wouldn't repeat some of them. But, so we've got to revisit this notion of and this image of nursing, because this is having a massive impact on recruitment in terms of to our nursing programs. Next slide, please. So, strength and courage to care. We need all of this on this slide. But I'm just going to refocus on the values and practice of care. Being a good and virtuous nurse, what does that mean? And an awareness of competence in terms of that, in terms of delivering spiritual care. Next slide, please. So Anne Bradshaw's work highlights the types of values that we need in our profession. And I've already said at the outset, when we look at what a covenant of care is, it's predicated on these values. So the good nurse needs virtues of compassion, dedication, and self-discipline, as well as humility that engenders sacrificial service. I think the word sacrificial is extremely, probably quite evangelical. But it is about service. And we do need this, but we do need other skills as well. We need to be able to challenge. We need to be able to present evidence competently. We need to generate evidence in terms of research. Next slide, please. So when we look at nursing, we can sometimes focus on the big aspects of treatment, the interventions that we do. But it's about those little things. So if you get the chance, read this article by Williams et al. Because they highlight pretty clearly it's the little things when we're caring for people that become the big things. Next slide, please. So what are the little things? And I've witnessed this all week at this conference. An introduction, hello, my name is. A smile. A smile can transform a situation without a question. A warm word of welcome. How are you? A please and thank you. I remember having to add please and thank you to this, because I remember once I was sending an email, my wife looked over and said, do you not say please and thank you in emails? And I reflected on that. And now some people say to me, you write the politest emails we ever receive. It's so important. Gratitude, thanks, giving merit and acknowledging that with our colleagues. So what I'm trying to say about the little things, as I've already stated, it's our demeanour. It's our professionalism, openness, courtesy, respect, and the approach we use in practice. Can we move forward, please? If we can go forward. I just want to go to the end. So if I can just stop on this slide. Can I put out a plea? Scan that barcode and become a member of the EPIC network. So the EPIC network, Tova's already alluded to it, is a network of health, nurses, midwives, health and social care professionals interested in the delivery and the enhancement of spiritual care. We have a conference every second year, student conference. It's next year in Worcester, in England. And the network's free to join. We meet 2 or 3 times a year over webinar and share best practice. If we can go to the last slide, please. Right, so just to summarise, I've put it in red. There's no covenant of care without self-care and spiritual care. If you take that away from this session, that's sufficient. We cannot provide person-centred and holistic care, which is central to that covenant of care, if we don't include the spiritual. And if we don't look after ourselves, we'll never achieve any of this. So thank you for listening. Safe journey home.